Okay, everyone. It's one of those days. Shit just gets wild sometimes. Thanks for tuning in. I'm about to do a video essay on Jonathan Majors and magazine dreams. First, I just want to say I love this guy. I've met him a couple times, and I think his soul is just tremendously kind and bright and beautiful and powerful. I met him in January of 2023, right before all the scandal and the cancel moment happened. During that whole process, I prayed for him deeply and was rooting for him to come out on the other side clean. Ended up marrying Megan Good, lost the Marvel deal, but I sense it's going to be even greater, whatever happens to his career on the other side of this. But I think it's so crazy that he went through what he went through, but he'd already filmed Magazine Dreams. And if you know what happens in Magazine Dreams, it's like crazy profound. That's what ended up happening. And so this has just been like a ready film for 2 years. It's May of 2025 right now. And when I met him, it was January in Park City, 2023. And he was there promoting Magazine Dreams. So just wild. All right, let's get into it. Thanks for tuning in. Here we go. Beneath the Flesh, Magazine Dreams, Jonathan Majors, and the Spectacle of Broken Masculinity. There's a kind of hurt and hunger that doesn't know it's hungry until it's already eaten itself. The spectacle is the ruling order's nonstop commentary on itself. Its glorification of domination in a dialectic of submission. Guy Debord. Thesis, A Mirror in the Flame. This is more than a review of the film Magazine Dreams. It's also more than just a reflection on Jonathan Majors. It's my attempt to describe and articulate something that I'm fascinated by, which is the zeitgeist snow globe of modern pop culture and how we look at ourselves through the media that we put out and entertain ourselves with. So this is a meditation on how fame has become a kind of modern mythology, and masculinity, our own unresolved psychic wound, and cinema as a ritual site where archetypes emerge to be crucified before they can even be healed. Jonathan Majors' performance as Killian Maddox is more than method acting. It's like prophecy. It's an alchemical channeling of a cultural pattern that is so charged with spiritual resonance that it blurs the lines between cinema and ceremony, between performance and public initiation. And what followed in his real life after he made this film, that ascent, the scandal, and the mythic arc of the public crucifixion only deepened the uncanny symmetry between his character in this film and his real life situation. So this is basically a story of how the body becomes the battlefield, of how masculinity, but in particular black masculinity, is consumed by visibility and invisibility, of how our culture no longer asks men to be strong. It requires them to be unbreakable until they break. And then when they break, their vulnerability is harvested as some type of ego nutrition for the collective pain body. Prelude. I thought it would be gentler. I didn't expect it to be like that. To be honest, I really did think Magazine Dreams would be something softer, something gentler, perhaps like a run-of-the-mill sports film about a guy struggling while getting buff and eventually capturing his dream of becoming Mr. Olympia. But nothing, not the title, not the trailers, not even my reverence for Jonathan Majors could have prepared me for this kind of performance, this kind of pain, this kind of truth, and this kind of spectacle. I'm usually pretty conscious about the texture of my expectations before I go in to see a film, especially with an actor that I love and revere. I realized that I did have some expectations, and it was really about the film being a little bit more gentle. I found myself being ultra surprised. I hope you are, in the good way, not a bad way. And just heads up, there's a lot of spoiler alerts what's about to come. And if you haven't watched it yet, this is not a movie to watch with the bros or your family. You're probably going to want to sit with this one with someone who's a cinephile or really loves movies. It's not light watching. It's a deep dive. It requires all of you. At least it did for me. I personally feel like Jonathan Majors will get Best Actor contender, Oscar nod. If he doesn't, I'd be surprised. At least Golden Globe, something like that. Watching it and moving into this world that he brings us into gives us the chance to leave shaken, but somehow more complete. Stir it up and riled up, but somehow feeling more human on the other side of it. This is one of those films that doesn't just ask you to watch, it asks you to witness it. It stares back at you while you're watching it. It doesn't flinch. It dares you to stay with it even as it burns. Majors didn't just play a character. He inhabited a psychic fracture within the collective. He embodied a kind of silent, sacred scream that I've only ever felt in the lives of people that I've known who were never really seen, who never really felt held, and who were never given the tools to self-regulate and navigate their own pain and trauma, whose volcanic pressure was building inside of their bodies to the point where they had some kind of a breakdown. And I don't think you can portray this level of, let's call it on the spectrum identity. He's not necessarily going for a classic archetypical mental health issue. Not in any way that we've seen before, nor would we expect to. But I feel like he does portray a really beautiful rendition of somebody who has a deep social anxiety disorder, but also is on the spectrum of autism. And I don't know if that's autism as a general statement or Asperger's or hyper introversion, but man, I got really moved and some tears shed. I feel so deeply resonant with that archetype of just being unable to find your normal footing where it looks like everybody else is just being a person, and it makes it look so easy. In Killian Maddox, we meet all of these archetypes. We meet the world's unparented sons. We meet the America that raises boys in prisons made of mirrors. We meet ourselves. We meet the trolls on the online back channels saying nasty shit to people for no reason in the comment section. If we're being honest, I think it can speak to all of us and awaken deeper empathy. Part 2, the plot, just trying to be seen. Spoiler alert, if you have not seen it, spoiler alerts are coming. The film portrays Killian Maddox, a young man, mid-20s, maybe his early 30s, maybe, not quite sure. And he's pursuing this fanatical vision of becoming a professional bodybuilder. What unfolds is a tragic unraveling, a slow-motion descent into isolation, delusion, and violence. At one point, he fantasizes about murdering a famous bodybuilder. At another point, he imagines revenge killing a judge who insulted him and his performance at one of these bodybuilding competitions. The lines between imagination and reality blur all throughout this film. He's suspended in a sort of arrested development, where his body is matured, his mind is shaped by trauma, but his spirit is still reaching for a parent that never came. He has various attempts to be normal, and he tries to exist in this complicated world, but after learning the depth of his very sad trauma and background, we're equally conflicted as well as intrigued to watch him navigate the series of obstacles on his journey. He claims to want to win championships and be on the cover of magazines, but any emotionally sensitive observer can see what he really needs is to be held and validated, to be seen as someone worth loving. Nothing deters him from his dream of superstardom. Not the doctor's warnings, not restraining orders, not his own increasing alienation from the world. He becomes a walking embodiment of what happens when the desperate need for human connection is sublimated into the pursuit of fame, where someone replaces their need for personal connection with public adoration. He works out relentlessly. His focus and anger and his trauma turns into this, volcanic electricity pressure into becoming ripped and shredded, but also how does he leverage that into the camera and online and to create this career, to lever himself up into the next chapter of his life. Every rep is a prayer. Every steroid injection is a sad poem. Every awkward interaction with a woman or judge, therapist, or at his work, which he works at a grocery store, is a shot in the dark, a hope that someone might say back, hey, I see you. Part 3, isolation and the shape of longing. Once we learn that he has been socially isolated after the tragic trauma of not having either of his parents present, we fluctuate in and out of feeling compassion for him and being scared of him, which is what ends up happening and what we hear from multiple characters in his world. Understandably, as he's super intense and intimidating, socially disconnected, and scary, he eventually becomes literally violent more than one time. And so, like many traumatized children in adult bodies, he clings to the one thing that he can control: his ritual, his food, his workout, his goals, his vision board, his delusion, his vision of himself. And still, he tries. He tries to go on a date. He tries to write apology letters. He tries to walk the tightrope of being human in a world that isn't built for the sensitive, the slightly neurologically divergent, different, the boys who didn't get touched and held when they needed to be, when they were young. One of the most moving and spiritually charged aspects of the performance is Major's portrayal of Killian as neurodivergent. I think a slight version of autism is exhibiting itself there. Not in a hyper-dramatic, caricature way, but in a profoundly human, subtle, real, authentic way. The cadence of his speech, the attempts at regulation, the ritualistic devotion, the emotional spirals, the lack of filters, it's all this kind of coded blend of autism and PTSD, social anxiety disorder. And I think Jonathan inhabits it, not as a trope, but as truth. And this is rarely attempted in modern cinema. And when it is, it's often met with backlash unless the actor shares that diagnosis. But when it's done with deep empathy and emotional intelligence, as Majors does in this film, it becomes not imitation, but invocation. It signals something more than a performance, like compassion and sympathy that we should have for this archetype in our society that we don't get to look at enough up close. He shows us a man who never learned how to be a person. And so he made a religion out of being hard and strong. Part 4, the modern myth of the hyperbody. This isn't a movie about muscles. It's a movie about the sickness of our ideal hiding in plain sight under the guise of a bodybuilder. It's a study not just on that trauma of Americana and what it can cause a young person to go seeking, but also some kind of modern narrative on consumerism and modern American ideals that are thrust into our faces and shown to us on all billboards and every pop-up that shows up on our screens. And also just a sad scenario of modern humanity sometimes that has such a depravity of essential human connection and empathy that is the bullseye of desire, so that those who don't know better, their bullseye of desire goes towards the most shallow forms of ego indulgence instead of resolving the pain and the true root of their issues that they would like to go away. But instead of dealing with those issues, they pursue things that they think will help them, that we're all shown will make us feel better. If we get that fame, we get that money, we get that physical appearance, etc. So Killian's body is jacked, it's chiseled, and it is, in this context of being emotionally unstable and potentially violent, he looks like a cross between an ex-pro football player and yet somehow remains in touch with this adolescent, pre-adult vitality, innocence, kind of like a comic book character drawn by grief, where there's this kid who was just a kid a second ago and now he's got special superpowers and hasn't quite landed in his body. His muscles aren't about power. They're a kind of armor, the illusion of safety, the lie of value through form. The most horrifying scenes aren't the violent ones, but those with the therapist warning him of the permanent damage he's causing to his body, warnings that he dismisses in pursuit of his dream. Even as his liver sprouts tumors from steroid abuse, he persists. The body becomes both the temple and the sacrifice, an altar and a crucifix, an ideal and the pit that he falls in. We live in a culture that tells men, if you're big enough, strong enough, rich enough, and visible enough, you'll be safe from abandonment and all the stuff that you were too ashamed to name when you were a kid. Magazine Dreams exposes that lie in such a brilliant, vivid, striking, and vulnerable way. It points at that collective trauma. Killian is jacked, but he's not safe. He is strong, but he's not in control. He is visible, but he's still invisible in every way that matters, which is so painful because you can see him struggling to get through it and figure it out, and he's just one step behind the beat every step of the way. And then right there, the film could have doubled down on making it about his pigment, his African lineage, his blackness, but surprisingly it didn't. There's a scene where he gets beaten up in the front yard by these white guys, and I just felt that they were gonna drop some racial slurs, but I was surprised they didn't. But even if they did, that would have just swelled into Killian's drive and testimony for being misunderstood. But I felt it was really well done that the writer-director, and I'm sure Jonathan was involved in that writing moment as well, it left it feeling more universal, but still very obvious that Killian was navigating that as a factor amongst everything else on his plate. What emerges on the other side isn't just a character study, but what director Elijah Bynum crafted as a grounded story so real it makes people think that it could be true. Because in many ways, it is. This is a story of a person that exists out in the world right now. Eerily similar, it's like Taxi Driver for bodybuilding. I couldn't help but notice it was the most well-done, crazy fan writing letter to his hero depiction since Stan, the music video by Eminem, at least that I can remember. But this time it's about men's physique competitions. It's about what happens when the unhealthy obsession with legacy and visibility converges with profound disconnection. Part 5, the real life mirror, Jonathan Majors and the shamanic spectacle. So here's where the lines blur and the real becomes performance and the performance becomes prophecy. It's a prophecy that none of us could have anticipated, and I definitely did not when I first met him, Jonathan Majors, in January of 2023, where he was already there at Sundance promoting this completed film, Magazine Dreams. And then what happened in the following months into spring of 23 was nothing short of mythological. The rise of multiple selves across multiple realities. Majors, after filming Magazine Dreams, he ascended to this absolute peak crescendo of Hollywood. He was cast as the main bad guy, Kang the Conqueror in the Marvel Universe, scheduled to be a huge character with multiple variants existing across different timelines and different universes. in the upcoming Marvel movies. In Devotion, he portrayed the first African-American aviator to complete U.S. Navy's basic training program. He played the main villain in Creed 3. He had already portrayed a character covered in mystical residue in Lovecraft Country, which, if you have not seen, is really profound. Check that out. This dude was everywhere, simultaneously a living manifestation of his Marvel character's fragmented multiplicity. He was, at that moment, the ultimate actor in every sense of the word, utterly committed, completely transformed, losing himself to find the character. His physical metamorphosis from Magazine Dreams was nearly as extreme as his psychological one. He appeared on screen looking humongous, imposing, ripped, and the embodiment of the hyper-masculine movie star. Then there was the fall, the spectacle as sacrifice. Then came his collapse, the allegations, the headlines, the accusations, trial, public crucifixion, and what Guy Debord calls the spectacle, as Guy Debord predicted, did what it does best. It turned him into the ultimate consumable cultural content. The algorithm consumed him. The very apparatus of fame that had elevated him now demanded its sacrifice. In Guy Debord's Society of the Spectacle, he writes that the spectacle is not a collection of images, but a social relation among people mediated by images. In Jonathan Majors' case, his relationship to the public became purely mediated through the scandal, a perfect crystallization of how fame as an apparatus operates as both elevation and destruction machinery for a human being. But how do we reconcile that? How do we process that? How do we hold the power of this performance without that shadow that's surrounding it? I'm not interested in moralizing here. I'm interested in what cultural projections reveal. Because Majors didn't just act the part. He lived something super adjacent to it, next door neighbory to it. He filmed his portrayal of a broken man seeking validation through hypervisibility before experiencing his own hypervisible breakdown in the grand public spectacle. The pattern, synchronicity as mythic resonance. The as above, so below symmetry here is too perfect, too auspicious to ignore. This isn't coincidence, I don't think. It's synchronicity in its most Jungian sense, an acausal connecting principle that reveals the underlying patterns of consciousness larger than an individual's making. He became a symbol. Even if he intended to do this, it's like, there's too many factors here, dude. You're part of an ocean wave, and you also happen to be a really good surfer at that same moment. He became Killian in the metaspace, a man carrying the weight of expectations, race, masculinity, artistic sensitivity, trauma, and uncontrollable public scrutiny. What Magazine Dreams does, and what Majors does, controversially, magnifies the ritualistic nature of fame in the digital age. What Debord called the society of the spectacle in its purest form. We no longer have priests, we have celebrities. We no longer offer lambs, we offer people. When they stumble, we light that algorithmic fire and watch them burn. In my opinion, men more than women, at least right now in this chapter of our social, cultural, algorithmic evolution. Something I can't help but see that causes me to further inquire into the nature of the human tendencies is to ask whether or not these celebrities who become famous through art at some point become the content itself. Or rather, their celebrity itself becomes more important and more intoxicating as a character, as content, than the content that they're actually known for. And I'm observing it myself, the best I can, but also somewhat slightly aware that I might not be able to see all of it clearly because, in a certain degree, I wrote an essay about this and I'm recording a video about this. I'm looking into a camera right now. I'm taking the time to do this. So what am I doing? I'm commenting on culture while I'm inside of it as well. Now, I'm not a famous person right now, but I have my relationship with celebrity. I grew up with somebody who has that as their experience in very close proximity to me. And I'm just watching myself watch this film as best I can. I'm watching how society watches Jonathan as best I can. And it just feels like that moment where someone gets crucified and they have that cancel culture moment, is that even more significant than the art that they're known for? I feel like the internet has brought that about in a way that did not exist 30 years ago. When did that start? Did the internet really amplify it? Was it already here? I'm not sure, but it's fascinating to watch. Transformative potential. So now, in 2025, we witness a new Jonathan Majors in a different phase, perhaps what Joseph Campbell would call the return stage of the hero's journey. Married to Megan Good, attempting a rebirth after a public death. The alchemical transformation continues. In this, Magazine Dreams becomes this cultural artifact in an anthropological sense, and in Jonathan's life, a tool for divination, for prophecy, for understanding not just the singular journey of an actor or a character, but the collective mythologies that structure our relationship to fame, to masculinity, to visibility and invisibility. The kind that doesn't dissipate when the credits roll, the kind that follows you home and sits with you at dinner and you can't stop thinking about for days on end, the kind that makes you question not just the character's choices, but the culture that produced him, and by extension, the culture that produced us. Part 7, Conclusion, the mythic wound and the collective healing. This film asked me to hold more than I was expecting to. It asked me to hold contradiction after hyperbole, after metaphor. A man who is both dangerous and also deeply wounded, needing care and love. A performance that's both transcendent and prophetically autobiographical. A culture that births idols and then eats them. A dream that lives inside of muscle but aches for a hug. It felt like a mirror for me personally, not that I'm aspiring to be a bodybuilder, but I have definitely found myself consumed with my own career progress as I make this video right now. Wondering what else I need to do to bring about that ever so sought after moment of success that I have longed for. And then I watch this character, and I watch Jonathan, and I see what happened in his life. This character, Killian, is staring back at me as a shamanic mirror delivered to us by this artist priest, Jonathan Majors. And he asks us to look at ourselves and to look at our culture and investigate more closely at what cost do we seek that external validation that we have all largely accepted as the normal fabric of our hyper-consumer culture. We all have our own TV shows. We are all egocentric at some point when we're using social media. Maybe some of us are pursuing the idea of a brand more than others. The idea of opening up an inbox and seeing people's pictures and then seeing how many times someone likes your picture, or seeing how many messages you have, or your social media is there, your phone calls and messages and emails. I don't know about you, but it's all on my phone. And this feeling of me being a destination collapses my presence into this single referenceable social identity point. So, just like Jim Morrison said, we all have our own reality shows. His ethos, inextricably woven into Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception, now forever echoes not as a prediction, but as a prophetic vision he delivered to us, and that his music sings to us from the past, the prophetic performance. What's most striking, most philosophically profound to me is that Majors filmed this portrait of a fractured, autistic-coded man's violent struggle for normalcy and validation before his own public unraveling began. The mystical residue here I can't ignore. Like his character Kang the Conqueror, who exists across multiple timelines simultaneously, Majors seemed to be channeling his future through the present, creating a shamanic bridge between performance and prophecy, very similar to what Lovecraft Country depicts. This temporal collapse, this bleeding between art and life, reveals what Guy Debord couldn't fully articulate. The spectacle doesn't just commodify, it ritualizes. It doesn't just alienate, it sacrifices. What we witnessed with Majors wasn't just cancel culture, but an ancient pattern of elevation and destruction that predates digital media by millennia. It is the raising and pedestalization of a member of the community, and then the excommunication that occurs when we find out something about them that we don't like to accept about them or ourselves. And I think it reveals something about our society's ability to deal with unhealthy patterns of dealing with trauma and dealing with emotion. It's that feeling of the kid does something wrong, they're excommunicated from the living room, they have to go into the corner. Breaking the fourth wall here for a second, I am becoming a father very soon. My wife is pregnant and we will have a baby boy in August. He's scheduled to come to this dimension. And yeah, I'm hearing all these different pathways and practices of parenting. And I feel so sensitive, especially when I see a movie like this and it depicts a character like Killian Maddox, because I can only just begin to feel how many moments must have happened in that character's life. Yes, as a character, but also Jonathan really was there. Jonathan went there. I'm an actor as well. I love acting. I love bringing myself truthfully, devotedly, intensely, with all of me, to imaginary circumstances, fully committed. And when I saw Jonathan do that as Killian, I felt all this traumas that young man must have had. And there's a super sad moment where he's just scrolling and these trolls, mean, nasty people on the internet tell him to kill himself. And then just so mean to him. And you can tell the guy is just being genuinely sincere. And he's not perfect and he's got all these issues, yeah, but he's trying his best to do this thing that he wants to do. And he's not hurting anybody. And the internet just gives him this mean, nasty cocky bully energy. Man, I'm about to be a dad and like, holy smokes, this is a beautiful world. There's a lot of beautiful things in this world. And also, holy shit, dude, like I'm excited to my child with as many tools as God gives me to emotionally regulate and create that healthy sense of identity, because it's so foundational to every experience that comes later in life. Self-esteem. If you don't have self-esteem, you go out into the world looking for it. You go to other people looking for it. And I think this is a super sad but super beautifully well done story about that. The Spectacle's Prison, Killian through Debord's lens. In Magazine Dreams, Killian Maddox emerges as the perfect embodiment of Guy Debord's prophetic vision in Society of the Spectacle. Not merely as a character suffering under spectacular domination, but as a walking manifestation of its internal contradictions and psychological violence with itself. Debord wrote that the spectacle is not a collection of images, but a social relation among people that is mediated by images. Killian's entire existence has become mediated by images through these spectacular image collections of bodybuilding, magazines, competitions, online, in paper. And we also briefly watch him watching porn, but not masturbating. It doesn't even look like he's really engaging in the porn. You can hear it. And what is he doing? Just drinking milk. His desperate pursuit of magazine cover visibility isn't just ambition. It's internalization of spectacular logic and philosophy to its most tragic conclusion. I am nothing unless I am seen, but not seen by people, not seen by real human beings in my world, seen on this stage that is mythological and maybe not even real. This movie also explores when Killian meets his hero, and that doesn't go as planned. That relationship becomes tormented, twisted, and skewed into a direction that he did not anticipate, that further makes his story tragic and traumatizing. He doesn't just want to be something, he wants to be seen as something. But either way, he can't tell anymore what he's even wanting. He's just running from the past and going towards this vision that he's been given inside of his heart, inside of his mind, wherever it's coming from, pulsing through his veins. The ontological spiritual has been replaced by the representational, which I'm still learning about what Guy Debord is even pointing at. I recently found this work, The Society of the Spectacle by Guy Debord, but I think it's a fascinating study, and the fact that it came out in 1967 and it's so relevant about internet media and pop culture today is so fascinating to me. But yeah, it's the idea that culture becomes a spectacle, a show, like a reality show. The real world is barely lived because everyone's watching the social world, and the social world is not real. It's the show, which everyone is acting inside of. Everyone's contributing to this production. And instead of real things, there's like images and signs, like props, so to speak, that point at the representation of real things, but they aren't those real things. Sounds like the internet. Also, if you have not seen a movie called Synecdoche, New York, with the late Philip Seymour Hoffman, holy shit, Charlie Kaufman, one of my favorite writers. What makes Killian's journey so devastating is how completely he has surrendered his present reality to the tyranny of a spectacle future projection. His body dysmorphia, the inability to see himself as he actually is, with some semblance of kindness or self-acceptance or empathy, becomes a kind of metaphor of what Guy Debord called the decline of being into having, and to having into merely appearing. The more Killian builds his body, the less he inhabits it authentically. The more visible his muscles become, the more invisible he becomes. What a dire paradox and contradiction, and yet spectacularly honest depiction of what so many of us go through internally, maybe not as extreme, but all in all. This is the spectacle's cruelest trick, offering visibility or external validation in that social show as salvation, while ensuring that true recognition remains forever out of reach, because inside the spectacle you can never really be your authentic self, which is why, to me, I'm loving that this is where I've found my calling, is to make stories and art. There's a weird thing that I'm navigating even in making videos like this, but I find it being a practice to attempt to speak to a real person on the other side of this. I'm looking at a camera right now, I'm in my living room, but I'm talking about a movie that really moved me. Like, I cried about it, and I cried about it, so I want to tell you about it. Now, I don't have to, but there's an opportunity for me to, yeah, I'm making a YouTube video. Why shouldn't I just write it down in my journal? I do in a certain way want to have a career, and this is a medium where that can happen. If I can do that authentically and not sacrifice components of myself, then I feel better about it. Killian Killian's steroid abuse and physical self-destruction represent what Debord might recognize as the pseudo need, manufactured by spectacular society. The need to achieve a hyper-real physique through chemicals isn't organic, but induced, a false necessity created by the spectacle's promise that only through such extremes can one become real. The steroids causing tumors in his livers are physical manifestations of the spectacle's violence against the authentic body, against authentic people, sacrificing health on the altar of an image and an ideal that one might be able to be. So sacrifice the thing that you have to use to get to the thing that isn't really real. It's a wild mindfuck, but this movie does it in such a good way. Most haunting is how Killian's trauma remains unprocessed, buried beneath this relentless pursuit of spectacular validation. In Debord's framework, this is precisely how the spectacle functions, by substituting symbolic achievements for actual human connection, by dangling this carrot of the future recognition to distract from the present wounds and the trauma of the past. Killian's fixation on magazine covers allows him to bypass confronting his abandonment, loneliness, neurological divergences, and differences. The spectacle future becomes the perfect mechanism for avoiding the painful present. We recognize ourselves in Killian because we all live under this same regime of spectacular distraction, the internet making it more intense than it's ever been. We all pursue images of success rather than its actual substance to a certain degree. If you don't, shoot, let me know how you found that out in the comment section. We all use future orientation to avoid present pain. We all, to varying degrees, let the dangling carrots of recognition distract us from addressing our wounds. Maybe not everybody, but let me know your thoughts in the comment section. The difference is only in degree and not in kind. What makes Magazine Dreams so powerful as a commentary on Debord's philosophy is that it doesn't merely illustrate the spectacle's domination. It explores what happens when a human being fully surrenders to the spectacle's logic and simultaneously finds himself rejected by it. Killian plays by the rules. He makes sacrifices, he endures the pain, and still the magazine cover eludes him. He is both the spectacle's perfect subject and its invisible, inevitable casualty. In this contradiction, we glimpse the truth of our own spectacular imprisonment, beyond judgment. The film asked me to hold this character, Jonathan Majors, in the cave of my own compassion, and to ask, what if this isn't about excusing or condemning? What if this is about learning to witness without turning away? Because maybe the real magazine dream isn't a cover photo. Maybe it's the world where we learn to see the spirit beneath the body, to recognize not just strength, but the wound that built it. In the alchemical tradition, the wounded healer carries transformative power precisely because of their woundedness. Perhaps this is why Jonathan Majors' performance reaches beyond just acting and into something sincerely shamanic. He inhabited a psychic torment that would eventually mirror his own. In doing so, he opened a portal for collective witnessing of a masculine wound that runs deeper than any individual manifestation. The ceremonial cinema. Director Elijah Bynum wanted to tell a story so grounded that it made people believe it really could have been true, like a biography. And in many ways, I think it is true, not as an actual literal biography of a person, but as an archetype. Like the best films about broken masculinity, Taxi Driver, Joker, yes, even Raging Bull, Magazine Dreams isn't just entertainment, but exorcism. It's not just narrative, it's ritual. If we view this film not just as cinema, but as ceremony, we might recognize that what appears as spectacle is actually sacred drama, a ceremony of witnessing that asks not our judgment, but for our presence. Look at this wound. Look at it unflinchingly. Don't turn away. And maybe that's where that healing can begin, not just for Killian Maddox or Jonathan Majors, but for the collective masculine psyche that is caught in this cycle of hypervisibility, invisibility, strength, vulnerability, violence, tenderness. Perhaps that's the thesis hiding behind the flesh of this film, that true healing happens not through perfection, but through the integration and the processing of the vulnerability that happens because of those wounds. Not through judgment, but through witnessing. Not through the spectacle, but through presence and authenticity. Epilogue, the multiversal self. As I think deeper about Magazine Dreams now in May of 2025, after watching it about a week and a half ago, I'm struck so deeply by this idea. What if Jonathan Majors wasn't just playing Killian Maddox? What if through some alchemical mystical process we don't yet have a language for, he was actually rehearsing a psychic pattern that would later manifest in his own life? Not literally, but archetypically. If Majors' Marvel character Kang the Conqueror teaches us anything, it's that identity is not singular, but multiple. Variants of self exist across timelines, each containing different potentials, different manifestations of the same core patterns. emotions. In portraying Killian's broken masculine striving, perhaps Jonathan wasn't just acting, but prophesying and alchemizing and being a shamanic medium, accessing a variant of himself that existed in a potential timeline that he would later inhabit in his own public trial and resurrection. This mystical symmetry is just so staring at me. It seems like such a coincidence and synchronicity. The bodybuilder seeking magazine validation film before Major's own hypervisible crucifixion. The autistic coded character struggling to be seen preceded Major's struggle to be seen in the public narrative. Those violent outbursts of a wounded man foreshadowing allegations that would later engulf the actor himself. I don't think this is biography or gossip. It's myth-making in real time. It's what happens when the boundary between art and life becomes permeable and adjustable, pliable. When the actor doesn't just portray, but he channels, he becomes. When the performance becomes a kind of divine practice. A phrase that I found not too long ago, and I love it, is the canvas has no edges. And it only applies when an artist really lives like that. And I think Jonathan does. Magazine Dreams stands as something more than cinema, as an artifact of mystical temporality, a testament to the shamanic potential of great performance, and a mirror in which we might all glimpse not just the wounds of masculinity, but the mysterious patterns that connect individual suffering to collective healing. So in my analysis and film review, that may be what makes this film not just powerful, but essential for all of us. It reveals the spectacle of ceremony and the broken body as a portal, and the wounded masculine as a pathway towards what Carl Jung called the transcendent function, the integration of opposites that allows for genuine transformation. And perhaps that's the real dream beneath the magazine gloss. Not just fame, not just visibility, not even validation, but that ancient human hunger for wholeness that runs beneath all of our fragmentation. My name is Rocco Nugent. If you could hit that subscribe and bell so when I post new content, you can check it out. I'm a yogi and a multimedia artist, and I'm putting out a new music video and song called 9 Lives. By the time I put this video up, it'll already be out. So check out my song and music video, 9 Lives. My album, Tiger Lily Quantum, comes out in July of 2025. Sending you love wherever you are. Much love. Namaste.